Ready, Soph? I'm ready.
There you go.
This way. Good. Let's do this one. This one. Sweet, JJ. All right. Hi, everybody. Let me make a drink. I'm running a little bit behind. Excuse me. Feel free to help yourself. How we doing?
Hey, Professor Carter.
Who is it?
Every time I
The
come.
ender?
Yeah.
Hi, Dave.
What's that?
Fry. I'm making a Manhattan. This is what one of the guys drinks in the story. I got spritz stuff.
Thanks, but I'm going out after this.
What? What are you doing?
Well, after dinner, we're going to Kai's.
Huh?
I'm going to hang out with Kai.
I didn't like the video.
You asked where I'm going. They can all hear us, by the way.
I know. It's funny. You're gonna miss this.
Like, 100% will not.
Oh.
But
Oh.
14 people looking at a blank.
What?
They're coming because of me. You have to realize this. This is most people.
They're gonna be like, bye-bye. That's what they're coming.
Hi, my friend. Said Judy Goldstein.
Hi, Judy.
Hey, Judy.
What's up, Bebo?
Isn't there a song about that? Hey, Judy.
That's Jude.
Right. As I said it, I realized that was wrong.
I'm glad you're singing this as well as I do.
Yeah.
This is so gauche. I'm stirring my drink with a fork. Anyway, sorry about that. I was downstairs picking up what to wear, and all of a sudden it was 5:55. I don't know how that happened so fast. Anyway, here we are. What time is it now? Doesn't matter. Hi, everybody. It's the final Aperitivo reading hour series, whatever. It's been great. I've had so much fun doing this throughout the shutdown. We began in March. I did a couple nights of Cucina Tipica, 3 nights of that, a couple nights of Attleboro Blues. I did the Domino Effect, and I did one from Black Irish Blues, and I'll do the last one tonight from Black Irish Blues. And the reason it's the last one is because Sophie's leaving. I couldn't possibly do this without her. Soph, come say goodbye.
I wish I'd known. I should remember to get ready.
I was going to say, that's what you're wearing, but I'm not going to say that because that's so cool. So think about everybody. Soph's going off to college on Tuesday, and we're going to miss her.
Miss you too.
I'm happy she's leaving. I'm happy for her that she's leaving. You know, she's been my wingman throughout the shutdown for sure. I'm in great company throughout almost all the time. As of late, she's been getting on my nerves a little bit, but you know.
Ditto.
Yeah, ditto. But we're back together for one last gig tonight, and then I'm making her favorite dinner, which I'll explain in a minute, and then she's off. So this will be it. I also feel like this is sort of the end of the long period. I feel like, I'm optimistic. I love autumn. It's my favorite season. I feel reborn in autumn as opposed to spring. I'm happy when summer's over and the school year starts, and life moves on. And I feel we're sort of doing that collectively. I'm also feeling fairly uplifted these days by just the friendships I'm making throughout this process. I've really made closer friends with people I was already friends with, for sure. Appreciated those who I was very close with, my friends and family, and made some really great new friends. And one of the wonderful new friends I made is Jesus Liel. He's an artist, originally from Chihuahua, Mexico, who lives up here in Brooklyn, and we just became friends on the streets, basically, and then through social media, and now we're getting together for social distance dinners. He's a really magical man, a beautiful soul, a great artist, a musician, but mostly a visual artist. He does these things. Maybe you saw this post on my Instagram earlier today. If you haven't, go check it out later. But he makes art out of leaves, right? It's behind the casing here. That's not a leaf, an actual leaf. And he basically stitches these designs into the leaf. which is just spectacular. If you think, look at the details of this. That's the figure of a woman. He gave this to me last night as a gift. To sort of reminded him of Sophia, he said, who's he's seen on Instagram Live. This one I picked out of a, like, pick a card, any card, pick a card. I picked this one, and it has a circular sort of pattern to it, which he explained, is very much what's happening, in the world, where we're sort of coming around and circling back around, which I thought was really sort of touching. And then he gave me this one too as a gift, knowing of my love of Italy, right? It's Remus it's the wolves, right? That raised Remus and Romulus in Rome. We're found in Rome, right? So it's just gorgeous stuff. I mean, again, he's doing this on a leaf, right? With basically a needle. Right? It's incredible. And finally, he gave me this one to give to Sophia as a gift. So he mounted his art here behind the glass, which reflects, right? And it's just beautifully, even the working of the copper around it that holds it in there is just stunning. So Soph, come grab this as a gift from Jesus. You want to say thank you?
Thank you.
She says
I
thank
love
you.
it. Our friend was watching. I would have said something earlier.
What's that?
I didn't realize he was watching. I would have said something earlier.
Oh yeah, I hope he's watching. Do you see his name on it? I'm sure he is.
I don't know.
Jesus, thanks, buddy.
Thank you so much.
And I look forward to seeing you outside again soon for our weekly dinners. Also, I've had the pleasure of being friends with the wonderful Betty Smith, who's a singer here from Brooklyn. I used to call her a soul singer, and I don't think that's doing her justice, right? Betty's bigger than a soul singer. She's just, she rocks. She does these ballads. She's just incredible. And she has a new album coming out, right? Maybe you remember her from my book release party for Cucina Tipica, right? After I read and bored people, she came out with her band and just ripped the roof off the place and played hours, right? She's just an incredible performer. Her voice is a gift, right? It's an American treasure, and she's just being friends with her as much as anything else. I've been listening to this album all week. I'm going to interview Betty for a magazine, so I've been really digging into this album, and it's just spectacular, right? Her songs vary in so many different styles. They rock, they're bluesy, they're ballads, they're soulful, and her voice just does whatever she needs it to do depending on the mood of the song. So she's just so unbelievably gifted, and just a beautiful lady. Look at this album cover too. Right? The title of the album is The Good, the Bad, and the Betty. I love that. Right, that's her dog, Jeremiah, on the cover. I have a funny story about him, I'll tell you another time. But it involves him knocking over a pitcher of Bloody Marys at an outdoor cafe. There's Betty again with Jeremiah. I mean, these pictures are killer, right? Look at that. I mean, what's great style. This is my favorite one, no offense to Jeremiah, but look at that. She's just so awesome. Great style and soul and spirit. And I'm so happy to be her friend. And you should definitely look into getting her album. It comes out at the end of September 25th, I believe. She's also headlining a blues festival up in the Hudson Valley next weekend. So look it up. It's at an orchard upstate in the Hudson Valley. It's called the Hudson Valley Blues and Barbecue Festival. Just Google Blues Barbecue Hudson Valley Betty Smith, and you'll find it. So I'm happy about that too. So these things are sustaining me. Of course, my own work is sustaining me as well. I've been writing like crazy. Right? So I have this book, Black Irish Blues, publishing in December of this year. Hopefully we'll be safe to have a party. But I also just signed a contract a few weeks ago for the sequel to Cucina Tipica. I wrote that during the entire lockdown. I just basically stopped what I was working on in March and sat down and wrote every day like a maniac, and I'm almost done. I was done with enough for the publisher to look at it and give me a contract a few weeks ago, and I'm putting the finishing touches on it now, and it's so good. I'm not kidding, it's really, really good. And I'm so excited for it to publish in March of 2021, right? So that's soon. So I'll have a book coming out in December, and one coming out in March, a few months later, and that will be my 5th book, 5 novels in 10 years. I mean, I'm proud of it, and it's certainly helping me feel good about the world and what's coming forward. Like new beginnings here, like for Soph and for all of us as well. Okay, the drink I have tonight is a Manhattan. The reason I'm drinking a Manhattan tonight is because there's one in the passage I'm reading you. Manhattan, if you don't know what it is was the favorite drink of my dear Uncle Danny, who passed away last year, and this is for him. It's a 2 parts whiskey. I use rye, 1 part sweet vermouth, and a little bit of bitters, right? And it's pretty strong. I was test running them last night. And the dinner tonight is going to be lamb chops. I have all the beautiful food behind me and a wonderful wine. And I didn't lock the dogs up tonight, so if you get me interrupted by some howling, that's the reason. I just forgot. So I'm going to read you a little bit about this book. From the book, here's Hadley. And here's Charlie. The book, Black Irish Blues, is the sequel to Attleboro Blues, A Brooklyn Mystery. That original title in this series, which I hope to continue beyond Black Irish Blues, took place in Brooklyn in the early 90s. The main character, at the end of it, decides to move back to his hometown after sort of returning to the East Coast from being a runaway for like 10 years. He was able to move back to his hometown because at the end of Attleboro Blues, he tricked his malevolent older brother back into prison, right? And with his brother gone, he's able to move back home, and he buys the inn in the town. What's so funny? So.
You need to see Charlie's dad.
Oh. Charlie.
All you see is this straight up tail.
Buddy, I should have had you here all along, man. Locking you guys up. Anyway, so he moves back home. So the sequel picks up with him back to the town. He does buy the inn in the town. And the town I'm referring to is very much inspired by the town I grew up in most of my adolescence, called Glen Rock, New Jersey. I love it. It's a great town. It's a big part of my life. Still is. I dedicate the book to three, venerable families from that town. The Manginis, the Ferraris, and the O'Sheas. There's lots of reference to things in the town that people might be familiar with who are from there, but you don't obviously need to be privy to them to enjoy the story, right? The most obvious one, okay, is going to come up here right away, is a police officer in town named Mike, right? I did model this character on my dear friend Mike O'Shea, but I unfortunately had to sort of change the honor of this character because I needed it for plot purposes. I needed this character, Officer Mike, to be a little bit corrupted, and I couldn't keep him as Mike O'Shea in that case because I love Mike too much. So if he looks and sounds familiar to you, that's for a reason, but then it's not supposed to be Mike. Okay, this is an opening chapter where Officer Mike, right, is taking out his old friend who's been gone for 10 years, explaining to him what happened to his brother, right? Who was, when we went back to prison, the character Caesar Styles' brother was murdered back in prison. And that sort of jump starts this novel. Here's an explanation which leads to the next scene and really the main thrust of the plot, which is the things that happened with the brother and his subsequent death. So, chapter 7 is the book. This is what I'm reading from you to start. Okay? A week from that Friday, I cleaned up directly after work and waited out front for Hugh. Oh my God, wrong chapter. 1 second. This is the chapter. Sorry.
Wow.
It's not going great today. Should we start over?
No.
No. So it's got plans.
Things to do, people to see, things to pack.
I know. Gonna miss you. Mike picked me up at 7 sharp, out of uniform in a polo shirt, jeans and sneakers, but he still looked like a cop, all clipped and squared. He drove a pedestrian 4-door Buick sedan, just like his old man. There was a cooler on the floorboards between the seats. Mike pulled out 2 bottles of Mexican beer and handed one to me. He twisted the top off his and dropped the cap in the cooler. I did the same. We clinked bottles and drank in silence, parked in front of my house, at the dead end where so much of our childhood had been spent. This is where we met each day, since I wasn't welcome in his house and he was forbidden by his parents from coming into mine. Woo, woo, Mike blurted, and I burst out laughing, spilling suds down my shirt. It was the call he'd make as kids if he beat me outside, sort of like ringing the doorbell without having to step on Styles' property. Mike, laughing too, clinked our bottles again before putting his car in gear and driving the looping big block toward the neighborhood's exit. Can you believe this place, he asked. Yeah, I said, the trees really grew. Mike chirped in his familiar way when he missed his point. I'm talking about the houses. You notice how much nicer they are? No egg stains, I asked. Yep. Any kid or neighbor who fell out of favor on any given day could count on their house getting bombarded with eggs that night. And Halloween was an all-out egg war. But there were differences I'd noticed other than clean facades. You mean like how people park new cars in their driveways and not old cars to be fixed on the front lawn, I added. There you go, C's, he said with a grand nod. What happened to your house, I asked. My parents sold it and moved to Florida. How are they, I asked. Fine, he said, as if that would be a foregone conclusion, that they'd still be alive and doing well. His privilege of having 2 stable parents and sane siblings was always a problem between us, and a dozen years wouldn't change that, so I let it go, like always. Where are we going anyway, I asked. You'll see, he said. I sipped the beer, looked out the window as my hometown passed by, happy to go wherever my old friend took me. We ended up at a tavern 2 towns over. We sat at the bar among all the familiar bric-a-brac of low-rent watering holes and ate overcooked cheeseburgers and greasy onion rings. Foghat played on the jukebox. Mike caught me up on all the kids we'd grown up with, and it wasn't pretty for the most part. Some had done all right, though, and as I had expected, they were all long gone. And just as casually as asking if I wanted another beer, Mike asked what I'd been up to. So I told him how, on the day I'd run away, I'd hopped a train to Pittsburgh, where I lived under a bridge at first, and eventually with two brothers from the Dominican Republic in a cold water basement flat, and worked as a line cook at a massive diner owned by a Korean immigrant whose niece I fell in love with and then got pregnant, which ran me out of Pittsburgh and led me to Iowa, where I tended bar in a ramshackle joint for a depraved and violent man who caught me in a compromising position with his wife on a pool table, and the gunfight that followed chased me and her to an area outside of Denver where we holed up in a motor lodge and sold pills stolen from her old man until a private detective showed up to take her home and send me on my way, which was toward Austin, Texas, where I met a massive bluesman named Macy Turner who befriended me and took me on the road through the Southwest playing juke joints and roadhouses, where outside Lafayette, Louisiana, I met a Creole child named Carmen with corkscrew hair and green apple eyes who taught me the local cuisine and how to Cajun jitterbug, and how I would have liked to stay there forever with Carmen outside of Lafayette until news from my mother about her illness brought me home, where I buried her alone, shuttered the house, and went to find a home in the mysteries of Brooklyn, where all I really found was a missing art student on the dawn of gentrification and my vicious brother Sally, out of prison early and needing to go back. So I set him up with the help of a Trinidadian vigilante who was my friend, and a quasi-corrupt real estate developer who was not my friend but paid twice what I invested only a year earlier in the two-family clapboard on a tree-lined block that I renovated beautifully, providing the profits to move back home and buy the inn, and here we were. Wow, Mike said, that's some story. I nodded. You should put it in a book. Maybe I will, I said. You're always good at that. Good at what? Telling stories, like your old man. I shrugged. He continued. I thought about you when I was in the academy, out in LA. One of the instructors talked a lot about police work being about details, noticing small shit that other people might miss, overlook. And I thought about you and how you were always paying attention, noticing. I can get behind that compliment. It might have been the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me. The beers were kicking in, and I was feeling good. Mike signaled another round from the bartender named Jessie, a big, handsome woman with raven hair, a gap between her front teeth. Mama tried, tattooed on the underbelly of her forearms, and torpedo bosoms that tented the hem of her half shirt. I liked how she kept that at earshot when we were not replacing our rounds, which she looked better with each time. She held my eye while placing our latest round on a coaster in front of me. I gave her a friendly nod and studied her swinging ass as she sauntered high and cocky like a house cat down to the far end of the bar, where she resumed flicking through her magazine and pretended not to notice my interest. Mike cleared his throat. Stay with me for a second here, C's, he said. You're going to want to hear this. Go ahead, I said, with one eye on Jessie. So, you were surprised to see Sally out of jail so soon? I was, yeah. Did he mention how that happened? Good behavior? Mike laughed, his deep yelp when caught off guard by humor. Good one, C's. No, he ratted out a couple of his fellow inmates who were running a pharmaceutical operation with some guards. Ouch, I said. Ouch is right. And I'm guessing, I said, they were pretty happy to see him come back so soon. Yeah, Mike agreed. Can you imagine? I decided not to think about it. The buxom bartender was of far more interest to me than the fate of my baleful brother. I'd been out of contact with the opposite sex for a while, and the single-mindedness of attraction, the deep longing in my chest, and the humming in my loins was coming on fast. So, I asked. Mike straightened up on his bar stool. Well, besides the obvious, you might want to keep an eye out. For what? The inmates that he ratted out weren't much to worry about. Some half-assed white supremacy outfit that Sally was apparently part of. That didn't surprise me at all. Sally was drawn to the hateful and the stupid. He also had absolutely no sense of loyalty to anyone or anything but his own raw instincts. But the guards who got busted, Mike continued, with his eyes wide and serious, they're apparently some dangerous motherfuckers. What do you mean, I asked. Word is that these guys are part of a group that basically controls the prison, not to mention most of the vice in Hudson County. They got shit in everyone from the warden on down. How do you know this, I asked. Buddy of mine from LAPD who's now with the FBI out here. So what's this mean to me, I asked. It means they might be looking for some form of reparations. What? I asked. Reparations are kind of like, I know what it means, I said. Mike put his hands up. But what the fuck would that have to do with me? Hell, they should be thanking me for delivering his ass back to prison. The inability to shed the stink of my brother Sally never failed to infuriate and haunt me. His reputation preceded me throughout my childhood, with teachers and parents and even the police. There were a lot of kids who were simply not allowed to hang out with me, and girls forbidden from talking to me, teachers who despised me from day one. And of course, I was on the radar of our half-assed local law enforcement squad who came out of the neighborhood to harass us all on a regular basis and who confronted us whenever we left the neighborhood. It feels like half my childhood was spent running away from them, and that was largely due to the havoc Sally wreaked upon that town. They had it easy. They didn't have to live with him or with the consequences of his life. Mike shook his head at my resistance. Doesn't work like that, C's. These are not normal people. Why doesn't anybody do something about them, I asked, pushing some of my resentment onto Mike. Isn't that why we have law enforcement? To enforce laws? That's what they had Sally for, Mike said, as his shoulders flared. He was recruited as an informant by the FBI. I don't know how they pulled that off, but they did. All he had to do was lay low, stay out of trouble. Jesus Christ, I muttered, like that was gonna fucking happen. I sipped some beer and thought of my imbecile brother as a federal witness. It made me sad for our country. Mike clapped me reassuringly on the back. There's no indication at this point that they'll come looking for you, he said, with a mix of formality and nonchalance. I just want you to know, and to, recommend that you keep your head up. My head's always up, I said, as I slipped off the bar stool and sought the bathroom. As I passed handsome Jessie, she lifted her face from the magazine and gave me a jangly smile. When I came back, Mike was gone. I sat on my stool alone until Jessie sauntered over and pressed her palms to the bar top in front of me as her breasts launched like rocket ships. Your friend paid the tab and asked me to take you home, she said, her voice hoarse and heavy with playfulness. Did he now? I asked. He did. Who's home? I asked. She laughed. You choose. I rubbed my chin as if in contemplation. So that conflict there with the looming conflict with the brother and the reparations of sorts from the guys he ratted out is what really informs the plot. I know last time I read to you a storyline involving a character named Diddy Tuitt who goes missing, and the two plot lines intersect, just like they did in Out of Where Blues too. So clever. I'm going to read you one more scene after I have a sip. This is the scene where Caesar has to go investigate. Basically, he is being followed. There's a guy standing outside the inn most nights, sort of waiting to speak to him, and gives him a warning, and then says he has to go see this guy named Mr. Porter. Right? And it's all sort of like, noir, menacing, shadowy type stuff, which is really fun to write. I will say that I love writing this book more than, as much as I love writing anything. The Italy stuff, obviously, is where my heart is, but the character and the voice of Caesar Styles really allows me to, do some things that I don't normally have an opportunity to do, which is sort of, introduce some poetry into some grittiness, that has some sort of badass characters that I love, making fun. It's really interesting to me to sort of veer into noir on occasion, because it just allows me to do things I wouldn't normally be able to do as a writer. And I do have another episode of this series planned. What's going to happen in the next the next section of the series, next addition to the series, is that Caesar's going to go down to Louisiana looking for that woman Carmen he keeps referencing, that woman with corkscrew hair and green apple eyes. And that will take place almost entirely in Louisiana, which I'm psyched to go research. Okay, so Mike takes Caesar to Bayonne, New Jersey. He drives sort of through the industrial, wasteland of New Jersey, past penitentiaries and the refineries and the silos, spewing, chemicals into the air, which everybody sort of, associates with New Jersey, that New Jersey stereotype writ large, which is a stereotype, because New Jersey is gorgeous. By the way, I have some Jersey tomatoes right back here. It is the Garden State, people. But that image of that area across from Manhattan always sticks in people's mind when they come up the highway, for sure. And they go to Bayonne, this industrial city on the waterfront, where Caesar is going to find this Mr. Porter character at a place called Glory Social, which is a social club. The small parking lot in front of Glory Social was dotted with American cars and pickups, except for a red BMW by the door and a spot reserved for the boss. The facade, stabbed with flags, was faded and resembled more of a rec hall than a watering hole. The sign by the door read, "Members Only," and I walked in to find a squat man in a beach chair doing a late Elvis impersonation with a jet black pompadour and matching mutton chops. Some of the hair dye stained the top of his ears. His dress shirt, open to the solar plexus, showed a gold medallion, serious cleavage, and no hair. His girth pushed on the waistline of his slacks. He stood up and his stomach lunged in my direction as he pulled off dark sunglasses and smiled without showing any teeth. "Wrong door," he said, looking up at me as wrinkles bloomed around his squinted eyes. "Members only." The room was bigger than it appeared from the outside, of exposed brick with windows and back that overlooked the waterfront and welcomed bands of sunlight that illuminated a swarm of dust motes and covered 2 pool tables, one of which was being used by a trio of dock workers playing cutthroat. The cracking balls filled the empty room with its only sound. A gaggle of other waterfront creatures lounged at the bar that ran along the far wall, where a tender with a monstrous head, wide shoulders, and tremendous height polished a pint glass with a bar rag and held my stare until a finger poked me too hard in the chest. That bartender is the guy who was outside the bar, Caesar's bar, and told him to come there. "Death?" Fat Elvis stood and asked me, "or after a beating?" He shifted his weight easily into a defensive stance and expanded through his shoulders. My chest still thumped from his poke. "And how are you?" I asked him. "Not friendly," he said. "You don't say," I replied. "But I do," he shot back, a tilt to his head, indicating perhaps that he was enjoying our exchange, though I knew my window for witty banter was small and shrinking. "Mr. Porter asked for me," I said. "Says who?" "Says him," I said, looking for the bartender, who was now nowhere in sight. Fat Elvis glanced at the bar and then back at me. "One of 2 things is going to happen in the next 30 seconds. One is that a man, very handsome black guy, is going to come through the door there behind the bar and call you over. 2 is that I'm going to escort you with great prejudice out the front door and maybe as far as the next block." I nodded and waited for Fat Elvis to make his move before driving the steel toe of my boot into his kneecap and then booking it back to Mike's car. The irreverent and dangerous doorman crossed his arms over his barreled chest and positioned himself between me and the bar room. From over his head, I kept an eye on the door behind the bar and watched the top of the pompadour for movement. I counted my breaths in steady rhythm, letting just enough adrenaline slither through my body. The room smelled of stale smoke and beer-soaked floors. At 29 breaths, the pompadour jerked and I grabbed at his neck with my left hand to steady for a strike with my right foot, but before I could deliver, a door slammed. I released the shirt collar, the necklace and medallion fell to the floor. Fat Elvis had a thick vein bulging at his temple and his nostrils flared. His eyes looked like they were about to escape the sockets. "Sorry about that," I said as I walked past him toward the man who waited for me at the marble bar, fronted with a shiny mahogany lip. I immediately knew to whom the red BMW belonged. Mr. Porter was a fit, natty man with fledgling white patches on his black face and hands. I'd seen that condition before, but never knew what it was called, and it always struck me as particularly unfortunate, even ironic in a cruel way, for a black person to sacrifice an aspect of appearance and identity to an ugly whiteness. "And how are you?" I asked, extending my hand as I approached the bar. Mr. Porter smiled, impressed, I assumed, that I was neither scared nor antisocial, though I was both. I knew his type, serious men of great intelligence and danger, a type of men who'd have been emperors or generals in different times, maybe titans of business or politics or law today, if life had afforded such opportunities, but who instead operated with great success beyond the periphery of modern society. I tended to like this type, being a fan of confident, self-made people and preferring those out of the American mainstream. Mr. Porter's hand was heavy and smooth. His eyes, twinkling blue, matched the pressed dress shirt open at the collar. "Have a seat," he said with a brassy baritone. "Offer you a drink?" "Sure," I said, not wanting a drink, but happy for the chance to calm my nerves after the near throwdown with Fat Elvis, who appeared in the bar mirror holding his busted jewelry and staring a dagger into my back. "Let it go, Aunt," Mr. Porter called to him. "I'll take care of it." "I got this down in DR," he said. "We'll go back," Mr. Porter assured him. Fat Elvis agreed with a smirk and a nod and put the broken gold in his pocket and resumed his seat by the door. Mr. Porter smiled at me, nodded over my shoulder. "Some character, huh? I'll say. Did a 20-year bid before getting out and finding gainful employment with me. Looks like the right man for the job." "Think you could have taken him?" he asked me. "Probably not," I confessed. What was the plan? Take out a kneecap, make for the door. Mr. Porter nodded, pinched his mouth, and rested a finger on his chin. See if you can make it to your friend's car before we caught up to you. I didn't ask how he knew about Mike around the corner, something Mr. Porter seemed to appreciate. About that drink, he said. Manhattan, I ordered. Bourbon or rye? Rye. My man, Mr. Porter said. He worked the bar with alacrity and had the amber cocktail produced in half a minute, orange peel garnish, no cherries, in a heavy low-ball glass. Thanks, I said and took a sip. I should come here more often. The smile about split Mr. Porter's face in two, and then it disappeared. Your brother caused me a lot of problems, he said. A coughing, laughing fit of which I'd never known erupted from my chest and garbled out of my mouth like ocean water. I leaned over the bar, clapped my chest, and bumped the marble slab with the flat of my fist. Mr. Porter waited patiently, amused. Sorry, I said after regaining a semblance of composure. I took a big sip of my drink to wash down the fit inspired by the absurdity of Mr. Porter's statement. I gather you two weren't close, he said. I held up a hand to please make him stop. Understood, he said, but regardless of that, your brother and a couple of his cohorts put me and my operation at the penitentiary in great jeopardy. I still had some lingering jangle in my chest that I washed down with the last of my cocktail. And it's incumbent upon me to make sure that said threat is entirely eradicated, he continued. Mr. Porter sounded like the lawyer or politician he could have been in another life. Seems pretty eradicated to me, I said. Mr. Porter huffed, smirked, then reset his face. For the most part, yes, but I'm still after a few loose ends. I sat silent. Mr. Porter pointed at my glass. Day drinking is something I try to avoid, as it can be very appealing, and I was also aware that Mr. Porter there might be after the veritas, or truth that comes with libation. But damn, that first drink tasted good, and I wanted another, maybe even needed another. Thanks, I said, and went back to silence as Mr. Porter removed my glass and fixed a new drink in a fresh lowball. You are aware that your brother was cooperating with federal authorities, he asked, with the placement of the Manhattan in front of me. Nope, I lied, and thank you. The sound of pool balls had stopped, and there was no one in the mirror behind me except Fat Elvis, who began working on a size stogie. Where'd everybody go? I asked. Out to lunch. That front door locked? I asked. Maybe. What did Sally have on you? Mr. Porter laughed. Sally? He went by Salvador on the inside. Can you blame him? I said. Nah. So what did Salvatore have on you? I asked again. That's what I'm asking you, he said to me. I took a nice sip of the Manhattan and looked Mr. Porter in the eye in order to deliver some of that veritas he was after. Listen, I said, the person you know as my brother was not my brother. We had the same parents, grew up in the same house, shared a brother even, but we were not of any relation. In fact, I hated him, and he hated me more. I'm glad he's dead, and I'm glad he's fucking gone. That's some cold-blooded shit right there, Mr. Porter said. But you don't strike me as being particularly cold-blooded. Smart. Yeah, smooth as a motherfucker too, he said. I'll give you that. But I'm not feeling the cold-blooded coming out of you. You want me to open a vein? I suggested. I want you to tell me something that will make me believe what you're telling me. I checked the mirror to make sure Fat Elvis hadn't moved. You know how Sally ended up back in prison, I said? Heard he got picked up in Brooklyn on a weapons charge. He was blackmailing me from my mother's house, something I needed very badly to keep, so I set him up. With the gun and some drugs, too. Baited him into the violence that brought the heat. I even had the cops waiting there when it happened. Check the arresting officers. Off the record if you want. Mios fucking Dios, he said, with the first hint of Spanish accent detected. So you are cold-blooded. Only when I have to be, I said. You know of anyone your brother might have told about his cooperation? About any evidence or pending testimony he might have shared? I buttoned my lips and shook my head. He made a call from prison, you know. Do you know to whom? A lawyer, I suggested. Mr. Porter nodded. You would think, but he didn't, which has me thinking the call was to somebody who has information I might want. Why do you think that, I asked. Because your brother tried his blackmail practices on me as well. You don't say, I said. I do, and I don't believe he was acting alone. I don't want to undermine your suspicions, Mr. Porter, but Sally was not exactly a people person. That might be so, but he did have a crew in prison, like anyone who wants to stay alive, and he apparently had some connects on the outside as well. How do you know, I asked. Let's just say the blackmail didn't die with your brother, and I'm thinking that it's the person he called from prison. I had a hard time imagining Tommy Funk in the blackmail business as the character earlier in the story, one of Sally's friends. up against the likes of Mr. Porter. There we go. I'm missing a page. So what happens there, I think it's going to be right here. Sure. So what happens there is that Mr. Porter lets Sally go, Caesar go, excuse me, and he goes outside, goes back home, and resumes his life. And then the issues involving Diddy Tuitt, who disappears soon after, coincide with Caesar's interactions with Mr. Porter, but he has Mr. Porter help him in exchange for finding who is blackmailing him. So it is like a quid pro quo. It's fun to follow. The story takes place, he goes into the city, and then Mr. Porter and Caesar end up taking a flight down to the Dominican Republic where the search continues. I won't give away too much. I think I have already. Thank you for listening. I know the short passages can feel a little somewhat incomplete, so I hope I've provided enough context to what happens there. There is lots of food scenes in the story too. Not as much as Cucina Tipica, of course, but there's lots of food in that Caesar is a cook. Right? And one of the things that inspires him to buy the towns in is that the food there is notoriously bad throughout his childhood and into contemporary times, the story setting. So he wants to find his redemption by making the only place in town with a liquor license have decent food, or really good food. And he's a tremendous chef, right? And he does so. One of the things he makes, one of his specialties, is what he calls Lolli Chops, which are lamb chops scottadita. It's an Italian dish where they take lamb chops, single chops, sear them really quickly on the grill, right? And then eat them when they're still hot. And that scottadita means burn the fingers. So you have to sort of endure a little bit of heat on your fingers by grabbing the chop, right? But it's so worth it because when they're nice and hot like that, they're just spectacular. And I'm gonna make them now for you. So we're gonna relocate our set, Soph. She was sleeping. I think we need some light in here.
I disagree.
Okay.
It's pretty bright.
How about I put the light on a little backdrop?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to move the cameras over.
Why do I only go on one side?
Oh.
My lights are broken.
Okay. Cool, I got this beautiful wine too. I moved over here. So it's my help.
Wait, I'm just seeing how close.
Okay. So we can get the.
It's a little too overexposed. Wait, let's see it. I guess we can see from that angle, but from this angle it's really exposed.
Okay.
Oh, I may have just no. What did I just do? Never mind.
All right, so we're now in kitchen mode. We see the stove? Go look. Yeah, good nice one. This is perfect. Okay, this dish here, lamb chops scottadita. Right, this is what they look like. Oh, look at them. They're beautiful chops, right? It's 2 racks that I cleaned up and trimmed. I didn't French the bones, if you're wondering about that, because I like that meat on the bone. I mean, it's all heated and hot, okay? I also have a Panzanella Salad, which is a tomato bread salad with these beautiful Jersey, with Garden State. Look at these Jersey tomatoes. Look at the color of them. Sheesh. They're spectacular, right? With some croutons, like big chunks of bread that I toasted and seasoned with some oil and salt and pepper. Let them soak up a little bit. I have more vinaigrette to add to that. Okay. And there's cucumbers and onions. I'll assemble this when this is cooking. Now, this dish here, right, it's not supposed to be made in one of these damn things, right? I don't like grilled pans. It's like a gimmick, right? But I also didn't have confidence that we were going to be able to relocate outside to the patio, to the grill, right, in any way that might be effective, especially since the Wi-Fi tends to go out there. So I'm hedging here a little bit and using something that I wouldn't normally do. So you want to make this on the grill, right? I'm going to make it here on the grill pan, right? Oh, dog's coming over. Look, you guys popped them out. Okay, I'm going to season them, right? I got beautiful coarse salt. And we'll be getting more of that later. I'm just going to make a couple of these now and make the rest actually on the grill outside once we say goodbye. What time we got, Soph?
It's 6:40.
Good, we're doing great. We'll be done in 5 minutes, right?
It's okay, my plan just got canceled, so.
Oh no! Those plans got canceled. To hang out with me.
You better give me
You
one.
should see.
I'm expecting a spritz later.
I'll make you espresso. Okay, so this is heating up. Again, these grill pans. I'm sorry if you like them. You know, the problem is that you get like that look of grilled food, but there's no real heat coming between the grates, right? So like you do. I don't find the cooking to be all that effective, but what do I know? Anyways, I have something else to share with you guys.
Your love for me.
My love for Sophia. Did I tell you so still medical? Oh, she's going to Ithaca College, in case you're wondering, upstate New York. They don't have classes, you know. People saying, writing back to me saying, Ithaca doesn't have classes, you know, in-person classes. Like, we didn't know that. I'm like, I didn't know that. Right, she's going up there to live, you know, in an apartment with who would have been her roommate, right? And then attend classes online while being in the area and getting to know Ithaca. But I think it's a really smart idea. I mean, first of all, you don't have to live in a dorm, right? I mean, the idea of people living in dorms, forget Corona, right? The dorm living itself, I think, is just idiotic. Right? You throw two strangers in a single room and say, okay, knock yourselves out, right? In a collection of all these rooms like that, it's disgusting, right? You share bathrooms and all these people. No, I think apartment living is a great idea, and she'll get used to being on her own. She'll be out of the house, right? And it's really a wonderful sort of solution to this problem, and it's making all of us very happy. I'm letting this get hot, right? It's getting there. My thermometer here says they're ready. Okay, so I'm gonna bring the chops over. I'm only got a couple of them here. I'm gonna make the rest of them on the grill outside. And I want you to, and this is like this. This goes like bang, 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 right? This is one of those meals you just cook in like literally 2 minutes per side. So I'm gonna throw a couple chops down. Wait, yep. 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 That's the sound you want, right? I mean, cooking is such an audio experience too, right? When you cook enough, like your ears get involved, right? Obviously, you see things and you smell things, right? But you also listen. And I know that this is the right temperature of the pan because of the sound that these chops are making in the pan. That sizzle. Oh. Always got to keep your hands clean. What are we drinking tonight? I got a Barbaresco. Right? Barbaresco is a beautiful red wine from northern in the Piemonte region. Right? People probably know Barolos better than Barbarescos. They're a little more well known. I kind of think of Barbaresco as like the Vino Nobile to the Brunello, right? So Tuscany has Brunello Montalcino, which is his most famous wine. Is a less revered wine, which is just almost as good, called the Vino Nobile de Montepulciano. I think of Barbaresco as that same sort of stature as compared to Barolo, right? And it's cheaper. It's spectacular. Let me show you the color of it. I opened this bottle of wine about an hour ago, right? And you definitely want to open your wine early. Right? Even if it's your $10 everyday wine, right? You want to open it early. It's been stuck in a bottle, right? Let it breathe. Let it breathe, people. All right, this one. Look at the colors. One thing that I love so much about food is colors. Right? Look at these tomatoes, right? And these herbs I have here. And, you know, it's just, you know, you see all this beauty, and it makes you feel good. What I'm smelling is, no, I don't do that. I just drink it. These guys are going, right? I need some tongs to turn them. Allie and Charlie are so here in full effect. Hi guys.
Charlie wants to ball back there. So
Oh no. I love these dogs. I mean, they are the MVPs of this shutdown for me. I should have a cooking show. Oh, I see comments. Amatriciana later. Oh, nice, Lim. Say hi to Dorothy. Chops are cooking. I wish you could smell it. I know. And it's fast, people. I mean, I turn them quickly. Again, the same amount of time. I'm thinking like 2 minutes, per side. These are single cup, right? They're thin. They're little, right? Not in particular little. I also make a dish that you can find on my website. I wrote the recipe for Men's Journal. Like with lamb, I eat a lot of lamb, right? I make lamb chops. I fry lamb chops. I cut them double thick, right? So there's basically 2 bones per piece. And I dredge them and fry them. Make like an anchovy sauce on the side. It's spectacular. But this dish here is my favorite. Right? And a funny anecdote about this dish. When Sophie was a little girl, right? When she was like, first, second grade, she went home with a girlfriend after school, and that play date extended into a dinner invitation. And the mom said to Sophia, Sophie, you're staying for dinner. I'll make anything you want, right? You want chicken fingers, you want pizza. So it said lamb chops. And Lenny was like, oh, right? Remember that? Because this is her meal. This is like Sophie's favorite dish. I used to make it every year for her on her birthday, for sure, but also throughout the year whenever it was like Sophie picked lamb chops, right? The kid spent a year of her life in Italy. I guess her second and third year of life, first, second year, right? And that memory of things like this is going to be with her forever. Right? These are cooking.